My name's Gary Mottram, and I work at the Manchester Institute of Education, that's part of the University of Manchester. And I'm going to talk to you today about the use of social media and other linked tools in language teacher development, with a particular focus on challenging contexts. This is work that's developed over a number of years and started back in 2013. Where I worked on a project in Pakistan, and as you can see from the slide, has been a continual development with a number of different countries and a number of different projects. And I'm still working in this area on a GCRF project with teachers in Côte d'Ivoire, and also working on a British Council report and toolkit, which I'll talk about a bit later. So I'm going to bring together some of the findings from the different projects, show how these were implemented in the project, the most recent project in Côte d'Ivoire, and what some of the things that happened there, and then bring that all together into a final sort of presentation of issues that come out of the research project and that are in the toolkit. So essentially, in the project in Pakistan, these were challenging circumstances because of the security situation there. And essentially, what happened was that we looked for an alternative way of enabling face-to-face sessions that had been working very successfully to be presented online to groups of teachers. And the teachers in Pakistan worked often in the rural areas, obviously in towns and cities as well, but we were targeting teachers mostly who were based in the rural areas. And these teachers would come into a particular centre, a regional centre, often in a local school, for training sessions of various types, principally run by their own education authority. And the British Council was working in partnership, providing additional development sessions for these teachers. So we set up and ran sessions using Skype, and the Skype work it featured a number of different groups of teachers who are linked together through the hub that was in Lahore in Pakistan, the British Council hub, and we created materials and we had a series of activities. So there are sets of activities that were built around the materials, and we ran those online. And a lot of this, we built this on some of the ideas that, if you're not familiar with it, well worth looking at. The Plan Civil en Anglais. There's quite a lot of literature written about this now. But essentially, these are remote classroom teaching. So in Uruguay, where the Plan Civil activity happens, they have fibre optic cables, but we didn't have that in Pakistan. We were using open internet, so obviously that caused us a few issues. But essentially, this was a similar sort of idea. So we had an interlocutor or a remote teacher who worked in conjunction with the central teacher in Lahore, so the British Council person who was running the sessions. We also piloted the idea of using, we had feedback through the interlocutors. So if a task was set up and run in the local seminar, then it was, ideas were fed back, questions were fed back and answered by various people. But also we began to use text messaging to actually try to have more of a sort of circular, more of an input from the local teachers. So a number was set up and teachers could send in text messages. So this was basic text messaging. This was kind of predated WhatsApp, but WhatsApp wasn't as popular as it is now. And with all of these many kind of summaries of these projects, you can find out more detail on articles that have been written about them. So the references are at the end, and some of them are linked below, for example, like this one. A second project that built on those ideas, again, I went into that thinking, oh, I'll be able to use a tool like Skype, and I wanted to sort of build on the idea of using text messaging. So WhatsApp was becoming more popular. One of the reasons for not using those kinds of tools in in Pakistan was because it was a 2G environment. But once we moved to the situation where we had the possibility of using 3G, which was the situation in Jordan, where we were working with Syrian refugees who were teachers, we were able to use WhatsApp in that kind of way. And it was, again, this was linked to a face-to-face course, but we were kind of acting a little bit independently, but still we were linked to this face-to-face course. And one of some of the issues that were sort of became kind of more obvious there was when we started using the WhatsApp. There were limited numbers of people who could access it. So it wasn't because they didn't want to, it was because they couldn't. They just simply didn't have the necessary credit on their phones, and they certainly didn't have Wi-Fi access. So we did find, though, that the teachers did engage. They discussed topics. There seemed to be ideas coming out, and they were engaging in professional development. And the point was that that one of the kind of key things that became evident there was that how important the role of the mentor, or the teacher trainer, in making sure that these things happen, was the teaching presence, as it's referred to in the distance learning literature. So another kind of key principle there was that you're starting with what teachers have. So, and that was the same in Pakistan. Skype was available. They all had sort of basic mobile phones, and they could send text. Here they had slightly more sophisticated phones, but they were limited by their access to mobile data. And one of the recommendations that came out of this project, again, is summarised in that article there, and another related article, is that that we should be thinking about making sure we include mobile data as part of projects. So we took those ideas into this more recent project. There are other projects, or interim projects that we had. So, for example, we worked with teachers in Rwanda, in Cameroon, and Cote d'Ivoire, and we tried out ideas with them, and we used a particular methodology, and we looked at ideas about building communities of practice. So this more recent project, then one's actually still running, took some of those ideas, the issues of resilience, the ideas of fragile contexts, as we refer to them there, and we also explored the idea of inquiry-led practice as a way of getting teachers to actually sort of explore their own classrooms and look for solutions within their own context. But what we're going to focus on here is the evaluation that we continue to do in using social media to facilitate these communities of practice. And this involved people at Manchester, but also colleagues in Cote d'Ivoire who were linked to the Ministry of Education. Now, one of the issues that we weren't able to anticipate, sadly, was COVID-19. And while the project was set up to have mentors, local mentors, to have visits from the team at Manchester, to have online activity using tools like Zoom and WhatsApp, we had to sort of rethink that as the project developed. So the phase one worked as planned, and we had initial meetings, and we had an initial visit, and we had also a meeting that was virtual as well. And then things went very quiet for quite a while for various reasons, both to do with the pandemic, but also elections. So election time in Cote d'Ivoire also creates kind of issues, security issues that we had to take into account. But we restarted again at the beginning of this year, and we had some face-to-face meetings in Cote d'Ivoire with the local mentors with a virtual Manchester presence. And then we had some Saturday meetings, almost once a fortnight, or once every 3 weeks. And then in between that, we had small group meetings with teachers in the local schools, and finished off with an online conference. Originally, there was going to be a face-to-face conference, but of course, with the pandemic, not being able to travel and this kind of thing, then we weren't able to do that. So, as I say, the aim was to, part of the aim of this project was to continue to look at, the role of social media, but with all of those other elements involved. So recognise that, if you like, face-to-face visits are important, but we certainly plan to make as much use of Zoom as possible, plan to use WhatsApp, and then other tools became part of the mix as well. So Padlet, for example, was particularly one that we began to use, but also PowerPoint was something that became important for the presentations at the end, although the teachers initially weren't going to use that. We had obviously most of the teachers had phones, although still there were some teachers who didn't necessarily have access to phones that were capable of doing what they wanted to do with them. There was an issue of mobile data, which we provided. So out of the different projects, that became an important. We provided mobile data. We also provided a router equipped with data for the group meetings that we had, and then locally were available things like projectors and speakers and microphones, and some of the teachers also had laptops as well. So there was quite a mix of tools and hardware, but principally we were looking at using Zoom, WhatsApp, phones, and local mentoring. So this shows how we try to kind of begin to establish this community of practice that we wanted to work with online, and we did a sort of whole week of activity, sort of 2 face-to-face sessions plus meetings in schools in the small groups, and we got the activity going. So that was the start. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see one of the schools, and this was, well, actually the 2 pictures on the left also show a school. This was the school where the teacher development team, the local teacher development team, work. So how do we use the sorts of learnings that we got from other projects? So here we are then. This was one of the first meetings, but we had a remote teacher. One of our colleagues in Manchester remained in Manchester and joined us on the sessions, the Saturday sessions we ran, and that was an initial. That was part of the process of trying to introduce the teachers to that notion of having somebody remote and engaging with them, either one-to-many, a bit like the project in Pakistan, but also one-to-one or one-to-small groups. And we did work on certainly did work on WhatsApp in those first sessions, not so much on Zoom because we were planning to do that later. This is then the restart, where we were pretty much all online in the early stages. So you'll see in the picture on the left, there's myself and other colleagues with a remote community. So what we did was we used the local teacher training space, and people were put in small groups in small rooms, and then the local colleagues were also remote as well. On the right-hand side, that's us trying to get people to engage with Zoom. Now, one of the things that came from that was Zoom became more important than WhatsApp. WhatsApp, could argue didn't really work, not in the way that it had done quite successfully on other projects, but essentially we ended up having small group meetings in Zoom. So the bottom right-hand picture shows myself and my mentor colleague on the left, and one of the teachers on his phone, and the other group, the small group of other teachers on their phone as well. So we combined different elements. So essentially we had meetings where there were a group of teachers in their bubbles in their schools, in their COVID-19 bubbles in their schools, talking to either the international mentor or the local mentor, or both. So that proved quite effective, and it kept the project going in a better way than the WhatsApp did. And this is a picture of what we did at the end, where we had a number of different presentations of the different projects. So again, there's a link at the end where you can actually look at those videos. The WhatsApp became more of a management tool in some kinds of ways. So it was used to arrange meetings. There were some discussions that occurred Again, this is essentially about meetings, but there were discussions that occurred, but they were very limited. There was a basically exchange of information, exchange of ideas, but not the ongoing kind of discussion we'd had in for example, with the teachers, the Syrian teachers who were working in Jordan. So we tried hard to get that working, but it didn't work very well. But we did use the WhatsApp as a way of training the teachers. So we did that remotely. And in fact, here you can see training about Padlet. So essentially, we were looking at ways that Padlet might work. And we used Padlet because we realized that one of the weaknesses of WhatsApp is that because you have a constant flow of messages, things disappear. So when you want to focus on a particular idea or present particular ideas, you're either constantly re-uploading material or people just lose it. So we use Padlet almost like a virtual learning environment as a way of storing material. So this is sort of sets of, these are columns of materials that around particular topics in exploratory action research. And we also posted things like summaries of the events, but we also used it as a way of discussing the questions, the puzzles that the teachers had about their classrooms, and try to use it to focus in on particular questions, to look at ways of collecting data. So, looking back at the material there, using different ways of collecting data to explore in more depth the ideas that they wanted to explore. And again, there's us. It all got kind of summarized in the end, in this final celebration. So that was the end of the project back in April. So even though the project didn't quite go as we planned, we still had the key elements to it. So we still made use of the tools to support us. As I said, the Zoom tool became more significant perhaps than WhatsApp, and we're still trying to find out maybe why that was. But essentially, the teachers were keen to engage and they wanted to learn these things. So they taught each other essentially how to use PowerPoint, although we didn't insist that PowerPoint was going to be used for these final sessions. So that was an important issue. So they managed to find laptops to do their presentations, and also put them all into PowerPoint. So there was a fair amount of feedback that we tried to gather feedback in various kinds of ways, but we're still doing that. But we are sort of still working on this. But you see there what worked well, the use of technology. So people said that the technology worked well, but we're still trying to explore what happened. And clearly, there were still things like problems of connectivity, even though we provided mobile data. So to finish things off, we like to sort of summarize things. I then went on to bid for a project with the British Council, where essentially I used my contacts with people who run groups, social media-based groups for teacher development. I contacted them, interviewed them, or ran focus groups to find out more about what works. So had, again, sort of feeding in my own ideas about how to do this. So essentially, I did interviews, focus groups and interviews to kind of, as a kind of grounded study to create a theory, and then built a questionnaire to sort of see what results we got. And these were the sorts of questions that we were interested in exploring. So although the initial focus groups and the interviews were quite localized, we managed to get a broad range of responses. And there's quite a lot of data here. You'll be able to see that in the final report in some detail, but I thought I'd show you that there was a good range of countries we got responses from. Just as a quick summary of the research findings, so this is still in preparation. There's often no other support offered to teachers who work in these difficult circumstances. I mean, sometimes there is. It often focuses around the teacher association, in fact. But what we discovered and what became transparent, which is why we sort of keep plugging away at this, is the teachers do have access to mobile phones and do use WhatsApp or other similar tools like Telegram or Viber or other tools like that to communicate with each other. People do set up groups, and there's a need there. So it's a need that's being met using the social media tools. The groups are popular. Everybody who reported back said they were happy to have the groups. There was a lot of enthusiasm for them, both in the survey and in the focus groups. People were very positive about it. People talked about how lots of ideas and materials are shared, that actually in these contexts where there's limited opportunity, then training does happen. So some of the groups run regular sessions where they run development sessions and record them as well and archive them for future reference. So as I say, if they run the sessions, they're valued. And the other thing about it is that teachers sort of say, well, yeah, we do use these ideas in our classes. So they're directly taking ideas into their classes and trying them out. And often that's the focus of some of the sessions. So that's an important consideration. So the other interesting thing is it's not just about pedagogic support, but it's about psychosocial support as well. So building that community, supporting that community, building what's referred to in some contexts as a resilience. And that resilience that is built because you've got that remote community who are working with each other, it enables education to continue during breakdown. So during COVID-19, during situations where there's a lack of security in a particular region or whatever it happens to be, where there's been a natural disaster or something like that. And also, pleasingly, there's some evidence that these groups also impact on learner outcomes. So in a way, that's the next sort of the next thing to be looking at in more detail. How do these groups actually impact effectively on learner outcomes? Just a few final caveats before I stop. So, it is possible to run teacher development sessions in these low resource contexts using technology, but ideally these would be supported by local mentoring. If not, remote synchronous sessions by video conferencing or a combination of both. It does, you do need a community to make this work. You probably do need a little bit of funding as well. So, but you don't need as much as all that really. So being able to provide teachers with some funding is an important consideration if you're thinking of running a project, thinking about how you might fund this kind of activity. Social media tools themselves, or communication tools, they're powerful, but they're designed for social activity. And they do need supplementing in some kinds of ways. So thinking, keeping it limited, but it is important, but they do need supplementing. So don't have loads of tools, but maybe one or two tools. Additional tools might be useful. So Zoom, WhatsApp, and something like Padlet, a nice combination that they serve different functions within a project. And you have to be sanguine about this. Groups don't always work, and there does tend to be an imbalance in who contributes. So that's the reality. If you look at the distance learning literature, you'll see that. But as I say there, people tend not to read that literature, and it doesn't have to be necessarily academic literature. You can find a lot of information online about this. So have a look at that as well, because I think it's important that we link between different sectors. And the final point that I think is so important, I sort of say it again if you like. So if you want a project to last, if you want things to be sustainable, you need to start where teachers are, not where you want them to be. So it's doing your background work and getting ideas together. It takes time. I think you get the sense of this is a sort of still a developing project. And every time you do something, different things surface. I mean, in a way, it's partly because technology changes, or you have a pandemic where people get used to using a tool like Zoom, but essentially you have to make sure that you start with the teachers and develop from there. So thanks very much for listening, and I hope that when the report comes out and the toolkit, you'll have a look at it and maybe use it in your own practice. So thanks very much.